The rise of generative artificial intelligence for use by software developers has been well documented, but how well is it doing these days? We're going to speak with someone who is on the front lines of many different software development projects next up on Today in Tech. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Today in Tech. I'm Keith Shaw. Joining me on the show today is Corey Heimel. He is the Vice President of Product and Research at Gigster. Corey, welcome to the show.
Hello, and thank you for having me.
And you've got one of the coolest backgrounds that I've experienced so far in the show. So it's like you almost took the time to make the coolest background ever for your videos.
I did spend way too much time and potentially way too much money.
I'm assuming that you also do a number of podcasts because that's a very podcasty like background.
Podcast, YouTube,
yeah.
In some weird future alternate universe, I'm a successful game streamer, but that is not this one.
Oh, nice. Yeah. Nice. All right. So just quickly tell me about what you do with Gigster, and so that we can frame the discussion around generative AI and software development.
Yeah, of course. So I lead product and research, right? And so what that entails for Gigster, which, Gigster's main mission in life, right, since we've been around for about 10 years, was to kind of enable the future of work, enable distributed teams, and invest in technology and research to make them successful. Our kind of like motto is to be able to assemble these really high quality teams from around the world fast, and then give those teams superpowers with tech. Over the past 10 years, we've been continually looking at what can we do to help developers be more successful? What can we do to make software development teams more predictable? And have always kind of approached software development from like a very data-driven lens. And so underneath my purview in the product and research side is saying like, all right, like what's going on in the market? What's new out there? What do we need to invest in? What do we need to kind of explore more in order to again, two sides of the coin. One, make software development more predictable.
Yeah.
But then also make developers, give them superpowers with tech. So
right.
There's a lot there, but that.
And so within the last year, software development has experienced this generative AI, ChatGPT, to help with coding, for example. Just have developers, you could just type a prompt in and it would write the code. But what are some of the areas that you've seen being on the front lines as you are?
Yeah, I mean, the Copilot, the stuff of that nature is all, I mean, it's amazing, right? It's super fascinating. We have a lot of, devs that use it when and where they can. Mm-hmm. There's interesting enough, right, is that, whenever we do work with any large clients, there's within maybe the past 4 or 5 months, there's an AI policy that comes with it too, that use the tools you can use, can't use, et cetera, et cetera.
Oh, okay.
And a lot of these LLMs and, generative AI models out there are typically on that list of you can't use these. Mm-hmm. Because again, the ability for them to kind of learn off the data you're putting in, it violates a bunch of the security, like InfoSec rules that come from Fortune 100, 500 clients.
Okay.
But, where we've found it to be really, really interesting is that, while it's got a lot of impact into the actual code writing process, the part that a lot of developers hate, it's not writing the code. Mm-hmm. It's all of like the ancillary crap that they have to do around documentation, around project management meetings, around making sure Jira is up to date, around like consolidating notes of what was worked on, bug reports, et cetera, where AI actually becomes really, really successful in helping kind of streamline what they do so they can focus on the super complex thinking and processes and problem solving that goes into actual coding. So while, there is a huge lift of, everyone says, Copilot is going to, replace devs. No, it's not, right? It enhances what they do, but where we found a lot of value, again, is that kind of what's in orbit around the dev.
Right.
And that's where we've been looking at it a lot lately.
And you guys, before we jumped on the show here, we were talking about you guys deploy a follow the sun development process. And a lot of companies tried to do this in the mid 2000s, but then ultimately failed. Are you seeing that now ChatGPT and other generative AI tools can help revitalize this idea? Like, what were some of the biggest problems, why it failed in the 2000s?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I do have to caveat that we do it when we can.
Okay,
we would
all right.
like to do it all the time.
Yeah, we don't want to say that you do it all the time.
Yeah, because it is extremely difficult to do even now. But what we saw was that there was this, and it was inspired a bit by Elon Musk. He had made a statement out before that, one of the ways that he had set up or sets up his companies is that he really thinks about work as never sleeping and never ending, right? Like the planet never stops. And a lot of way that companies and organization operate today, it is, your 9 to 5. Like, yes, you might have kind of some split and overlap time zones, but there's huge gaps where no work's being done. So what he kind of deployed within his orgs is this infrastructure and kind of workflows that let people continuously hand off work throughout, the rotation of the Earth. And a lot of that is around like project management and maybe some engineering stuff. But what we said is that, all right, like, we're kind of doing this a little bit today with development, but we need to put some more resources towards it and try it and see what happens. And where did it fail before? So we talked to a lot of the researchers that, again, in the, kind of early mid 2000s, they gave it a shot. I think IBM tried it, like Infosys tried it, some other companies tried it, and it failed spectacularly. And so when we talked to these researchers and went through a bunch of the data and findings, the main point where things broke down was in the communication and handoff portion between two separate teams.
Okay.
And, the way that we basically break down and segment it out is that, we cut the world into like 3 zones. And those 3 teams will kind of continuously hand off work as it goes around. But that handoff position between the 2 teams is incredibly, incredibly important, because if one of those handoffs fails, you basically have to wait, until it comes all the way back around in order to kind of pick it up and solve it. So you can have huge upside with like tons of optimization and productivity that goes through the roof, or it can like really break, and next thing you know, you can fall far behind.
Can you describe the handoff for people that might not know what you are referring to? Is it just that a coder works for 6 or 7 hours on writing something, and then he has to then tell the next person what he did or what they did, and then the next person has to go through and review all of the changes that were made? Is that kind of how the handoff works?
Right, exactly. And so, you can kind of think of it as like, imagine that you're kind of building on a set of Legos.
Okay.
And then someone else comes in and it's like, all right, I'm ready to start. You kind of want to show them like, here's where I was, here's where I was going to go next. This is kind of how I've set up the pieces so we can easily get to them.
Right.
And so you kind of ramp them into what was the current work in progress so they can pick it up and keep it rolling.
Right. But it's almost as if you were building a Lego set, but without the instructions. Like you were building a freestyle Lego.
Exactly. You were building a freestyle Lego. So you might say that, we're trying to build a starship, and everyone kind of gets a little bit of their own interpretation of what a starship might be or might look like, or what might be important to work on in their block. So having that time to convey to the next team where you are, what's going on, is incredibly important. And back in the 2000s, when they were trying this kind of the first time, they were literally picking up the phone and calling people over a landline. Like imagine sitting there with a phone with a cord, which sounds ridiculous now. And no screen sharing. You're emailing the code base to the next team and saying, hey, here's what we did. And the other person's like scribbling down some notes, trying to understand what exactly is going on. And then they hang up the phone and the next team's like, okay, well, what do we do now?
Yeah.
And what we saw and what we thought was like that, if that's the problem they were having, like we are so far ahead of what that was. We're like solidly, GitHub is and reversion and code check-in has come to a great place. You've got video calls, like everyone's already operating post-COVID in this kind of distributed virtual world. We should be able to solve these problems now. So we started piloting it and had some early successes. And then what we started to see was that, there's definitely places where AI can kind of plug into this. And what we found was interesting is that the main part that was a problem was it's kind of like moving a mental context from one team to the next. And being able to understand the questions that the previous team might have been asking because that provides a ton of understanding of what issues they were facing, how they maybe why they chose the decisions they did to fix them. And with generative AI and like ChatGPT, what's really interesting is that if you start a chat thread, you can share that chat thread and it starts to learn the context and has the history of questions that were answered. So if you switch that and move that along and pass that from team to team, as well as video recordings, GitHub logs, like good issue tracking with Jira, like all the other fundamental stuff.
Yeah.
You can kind of solve that context switching issue to a degree. Like obviously it's not to 100%, but it does actually help you take full advantage of having like again, we try to think of it as like planetary development and not just regionally or time zone one, which is fascinating to find.
Yeah. So some of these tools now could be used to, at the start of my shift, if I'm a developer, I can have the Gen AI stuff and go through and read what has already been documented. And then it gives me a summary so that I can more quickly understand where my next steps are. Does that make sense? Is that fair?
Right. Yeah, sure. Yeah. At a high level. Right.
Okay.
Sure. At a high level.
Right.
Yeah.
So what are some of the other ways that you're also seeing, Gen AI being used? It's obviously writing code, but it can also interpret the code that you're writing. Does it verify it? Can it verify it? Or are there other new ways of, because I know that in the past there's been code verification systems and things like that, but what are some of the other new ways that you're seeing people use it?
Yeah, so I mean, I'll be honest, I haven't personally messed much with like the actual verification. We use providers like SonarQube and stuff like that'll like automatically run like static code analysis to determine it. But what is really interesting is being able to like summarize code and like what it does for the documentation purposes. Again, when I mentioned like what, when we think about giving tools to developers, if you put your seat in the customer, it's like, what do they hate to do, right? No developer. I was a developer for a number of years.
Yeah.
It's been a while, so I don't claim to be one anymore. But one of the things that I hated doing was like documenting code. But it's so fundamentally important when you're doing large scale projects. But it's something that every developer out there does not want to sit there and write documentation. So being able to pass in, a file or a class of code and say, summarize what this does is just huge, right? It frees up more time. It creates a better work environment. It leaves them in a better headspace. And that's one, like I said, we haven't done much on like the code interpreter and things with some of the open AI tools. But obviously like Copilot's got some cool features and neat stuff in there on that side. But I'm excited to see where I think the next part is going to come in, and it's already started to lightly do it, is AI integration directly into IDEs. So for those of you that don't know what an IDE is, it's basically like a program that programmers use to go and write their code.
Yep.
So you can think of it as having like AI infused in the Microsoft Word, but this is infusing AI into the foundational program that they use to write the code.
Yeah.
And once you start doing that, you get some really, really interesting stuff happening. And, I think there's some really cool work going on around being able to write in a prompt for kind of what you want. And before you would write in a prompt and it would give you the code that comes out with it. But, I've seen some of these new tools come out where you write a prompt and it'll basically design the UI for you and then also kind of give you all the underlying code that goes with it. So not only are you getting raw code, you're also now getting front end utilities to go on top of that. And, as of now, today, a lot of the developer, and this is I'm going to caveat, but this is a very generic statement, but like today, a lot of developers are either kind of in the front end world or on the back end world.
Right.
And if you're trying to do a startup, you're trying to like make something happen. If you're in one of those two camps, you kind of need support from one of those other houses or that kind of other side of the aisle. And, with some of these new tools, what we hope and expect to see is that more developers are able to kind of turn in and to full stack, being able to kind of cover both front end and back end. And I think that's going to be a really, really interesting play, because then the next logical step from there is that where does the designer get integrated into this now, right? And then how does that link then into like the product requirement stock? So is AI kind of like eating software development like piece by piece and integrating and optimizing all of the different roles into a much more kind of cohesive skill set? And I think that's going to be interesting to see how it plays out and what it kind of means for current software development techniques, roles, education, people coming into the workforce, what their skill sets, where they will kind of lie, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's exciting to watch.
Is it hard for developers to keep up with what's going on with all these tools coming out on a weekly, if not daily basis, with announcements and new features? Because again, it feels like everyone is adopting AI, no matter what industry you're in, and it feels like if you're trying to you want to use these tools, but can you keep up with the rate of how the tools are being updated?
Yeah, I don't, yes, it is very difficult to do. And the reason why is that, trying to think of the best way to phrase this, is that the developers, from what I've seen, have very polarizing positions on what the AI is. Some, are like, this is really cool. Mm-hmm. This is neat. Let me test it out. And then others that just will simply shut the door on it and say, no, this is ridiculous. This doesn't work. This is bullshit. It doesn't do it's not as good as what everyone's saying it is. And it is very, I've seen it from what I've seen. My own side is that it is very polarizing within the community. And, with that, it makes it very difficult to keep up with all the new tools that are coming out, because trying to alter your workflow and the way that you code is not something that a lot of people want to do. It is very kind of like mentally taxing to kind of try to adjust and build new stuff into your workflows.
Yeah.
I 100% kind of feel for the developers out there, right? And kind of getting just flooded with now everything is, plus AI. Okay. I don't even know where to begin, right?
That's just like from my end, I'm just monitoring the productivity software that, a company like Microsoft or Google comes out with, and they're just like, oh, we've got Copilot here, Copilot there, Copilot there. Half of these things I probably won't ever try or learn to try. Mm-hmm. The others I might dabble with it a little bit, but I don't see me changing my workflow just yet. And so I'm wondering if on the software development side, it's the same kind of feeling of almost too much too quickly.
Yeah, like 100%. And I think that I'm curious to see if what is the market saturation point where everyone's kind of like, oh, okay, like this is enough, right? And it's like, is there going to hit some backlash of like, it's almost now cool to say that you don't have AI in it? It's like, no, like this is real. There's no AI in any of this.
Yeah.
I can see too in the future that, having, when I think about social media platforms or content platforms where people post, being able to validate, that there is no AI included in this. I don't know what I saw the other day the statistic that like Stack Overflow is, I think that they dropped like 20% of their headcount or 25% of their headcount after AI, the generative AI came out, mm-hmm. because nobody's going in and really needing to ask questions from the general public anymore. And I think that's good or bad. I don't really yet know the position on it, but I do think that there is definitely a net negative effect of not networking, right? And not actually talking to other people in the development community and actually getting real feedback from individuals versus just from a LLM. But that might be backlash, me getting old and grumpy.
Yeah, that little backlash comment might be interesting, because then companies might start putting on labels that say 100%, code written by 100% humans, or we're going to get labels or designations like that versus 100% written by AI.
And and like, what I find interesting about it is that, if you look at the huge. So a lot of companies, a lot of airlines, right? A lot of banks, a lot of their like core infrastructure still runs on mainframes, right? I mean, some of them are out there still running Fortran and other, stuff. And if you look at the developer pool that's out there to be able to support that, it is shrinking so fast, if not near zero. And, when I look at kind of in the future, it's that if developers become like, will you have this segmentation of developers that are basically overly reliant on AI, so they actually don't know a lot of the core fundamentals of programming, and actually understand, discrete math and like be really good at Boolean logic and designing classes and architecture, but have a heavy reliance on using these models. But at the same time, there's a huge and massive security risk to leveraging them, how does the developer community kind of resolve that? Because you might have a great developer on paper. You bring them in, and it's like you've got to work behind the wall because you're working on banking infra systems, or you're working on something that requires that you can't use it.
Yeah.
Do you get this kind of large separation gap within the workforce? And I kind of foresee that coming, and I don't know what exactly to make of it yet. But I think it will be interesting to see how it plays out, because I think you're gonna the definition of what is a good developer. One is already really hard to define.
Yeah.
But two, I think will become even more difficult to define after this has really truly like integrated and dug its fingers into software engineering.
Is it naive for me to say, in looking at the shrinking numbers of programmers for a certain language, or from some of those old days types of mainframe things, is it naive for me to say, well, could you train AI to become a developer, to become a Fortran programmer, or COBOL back in the day when we were all facing the Y2K issue? Most of those things are written in COBOL, and my stepmother was a COBOL programmer, and she tried to describe what COBOL was, and she says it's like writing a long letter to your grandmother.
Yeah.
Or is it naive to try to then say, well, we'll just train AI to be the COBOL programmer? It feels naive as a question.
Yeah, I mean, I could see a this is going to sound really bad. I could see a non-tech CEO being like, oh yeah, we'll just have AI do that too.
Yeah.
It's not quite that simple, especially when you have like these massive historical systems to do it. And maybe.
Or is that the beginning of the end when the computers finally take over?
Yeah, when the computers are writing themselves.
Yeah.
Then then Skynet becomes a little less science fiction.
Yeah,
potentially a little more real. But like it does, I think that it does really, really urge the point, right, where there is an inherent risk to developers becoming overly dependent on the tech, because they again lose out on a lot of the fundamentals of how to think about programming from an architecture standpoint, from like a problem solving and complexity standpoint. And if you can just put in like, hey, build me this app, and then it builds the app, like, are you capable of debugging it? Like if something goes wrong, as soon as it gets a little more complicated, like what does that mean? And because I like to think about it from like more of a abstract, again, like workforce impact, 5, 10, 20 years from now. What will hiring look like? What will retention look like? How does that change truly what it means to be a tech company? And what do you do about building a labor force where you have very large scales of variance and, like, I would say, like complex problem solving programmers versus highly tool but fast developers? Yeah,
this was a topic I think we covered on another episode where we're talking about training the next generation of students and people that are going to grow up with AI as a default, almost like the way that when you were teaching math to little kids, you still have to teach the fundamentals. And is that going to, when we're teaching future software developers, is that going to be the same thing?
Yeah, no, that's that's a great question. I don't know. Someone out there knows the answer, and I would love to.
Well, do you have an opinion on it? Like, do you think that that colleges and education and businesses are going to still have to train the basics, or just train the basics and then just say, well, then just use AI for the rest?
Yeah, I mean, so here's the thing, right? Is that any new innovation will create disruption kind of in the status quo, right? And I get asked this question all the time, like, is AI going to replace jobs?
Yeah.
And it's like, obviously, yes, of course it's supposed to. If it didn't replace jobs, like, or didn't replace jobs, then why are we even doing it?
Yeah.
But it will create new jobs, just as electricity did, just as the automobile did, just as the airplane did. But what I think is interesting in this type of disruption where we are now is that it's starting to actually impact kind of the status quo from the education standpoint. And what I mean by that is, like, a lot of where I learned, I would say kind of cut my teeth in programming is that, was in high school, was then in college. But I learned more, I felt as though I learned more practical applications outside of school than I did in school.
Right.
But I still was being taught the fundamentals there. And now maybe like in my youthful brain, I was like, oh, there's no way, this is pointless. But I did get a lot of, like, again, it was the fundamentals that were there.
Yeah.
And also I didn't have much of an avenue to go into freelance programming. Like, it wasn't quite as big then. But when I look at kids coming up now, if you're, I was reading a thing the other day about, a college kid that had written a AI program that could use computer vision to decipher Egyptian text on a papyrus and won like 40K. But like, there's nothing stopping these younger kids from now being able to participate in the freelance economy for programming and actually be really proficient in it, and therefore question, do I even need to continue on with my education, or now I have enough to be able to create a viable living here?
Right.
And in that skip, do they actually face losing a lot of like that fundamental teachings that get taught in school that most kids don't appreciate? And what will that kind of mean? And will there be negative backlash for that? Right. And that I think is an interesting kind of thought exercise to run through.
Yeah, it does feel like too that businesses then need to really look at how they are training employees on newer techniques and newer tools, and sometimes it feels like that falls by the wayside. The training budgets usually are the first things cut sometimes.
Yeah. I mean, it's amazing. Like, I consider our company innovative, right? Like, we're constantly trying to do new stuff, but it's still not easy.
Yeah.
Right? It's still not easy to bring in a new tool and like, we're going to start using this. It's really difficult to do. And so I can't, I feel for the larger enterprises. It's like now as I'm aging, right? I can understand why IBM and some of these other companies, everyone's like, oh, they move so slow. I'm like, I get it, right? Trying to get people to like have a cohesive email signature, even at a smaller company is difficult, much less try to get some other crazy solution or workflow deployed.
Yeah. So I want to switch back to a little ChatGPT stuff for a second. Have you monitored the development of GPT 3, 3.5, and 4? Because I've seen some things beyond the software development space of where some people think it might not be getting smarter, it's actually getting dumber. Do you guys monitor that on the software development side? Is it getting better at some of these code development features?
So I can only provide anecdotal feedback. I wish that we had some data, like some rigor around being able to test this completely, because I hear it across the board that it's getting worse. And I agree, but my understanding of why it's getting worse is that originally the GPT's models kind of ran as like as a monolith, right? Mm-hmm. So it's like one huge LLM that you're able to kind of go at, one brain that you can go ask these questions for. And what my understanding is that OpenAI was switching to this concept called a mixture of experts, where you have multiple models, like, 1 to n number of models, where each of those models is kind of smaller, but kind of more specialized in something. So if you went to ChatGPT and said, hey, write me a social media post for LinkedIn around AI, right? It might go to the one little brain that's around writing social media posts.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't get as much context as the giant brain does. Now, why would anyone do that? Quite frankly, it's extremely expensive to run and consistently train a huge LLM model.
Right.
It's like, I think OpenAI was burning something like $30 or $40 million a month just to run this huge model. So it becomes more cost effective to start
Right.
to have this, what they call mixture of experts. And so whenever you do that, though, you obviously will lose a large amount of knowledge because you're kind of shrinking down what's there. And when you ask a question, it kind of goes to a model first that then routes it and interprets it to what other model it should be going for. Now, there's tons of learnings that have to go into that. Like you have to train that. The only way to train it's with real data. So do I think that there's a dip now? For sure. Do I think it'll get better? Absolutely.
Yeah.
Do I think they made the right move in doing that? Like 100%. You know, when we look at the future, especially when it comes to like enterprise adoption or, and this is kind of important, I think, for developers as well, how enterprises will be adopting AI, it is going to be this concept of a mixture of experts. It's going to be able to, how do you build an effective strategy that leverages multiple different models, potentially from multiple different providers? You know, we've gone in with some of our customers to, you know, do, for instance, like image generation. It's like, well, let's try, you know, Google's, let's try, you know, see how it compares to Midjourney.
Yeah.
Let's, you know, maybe try DALL-E, right? And while the AI might work best using, from, you know, as an example, Google has the best image one, but OpenAI has the best textual interface. And then, you know, maybe there's some other one, Cohere has a better dev or project management one. And being able to effectively use these different models to their best ability and string them together in a cohesive experience is where we kind of, that is our kind of vision of what future architecture was going to look like, future adoption is going to be. Because one, you get better performance, and also two, you can get significantly lower cost to operate,
Right.
Which is always important.
So at this point, it would just be a blip in terms of the technology getting dumber. You think that they'll figure this out?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. When you're working with clients that are in some of these software development projects, you don't have to, I don't want you to name any names or specific projects, but are you finding that most of them are still in that trial period, or have you seen a lot moving to deployment? Because it's now October 2023. So I get a sense that a lot are still in that trial period, but are you seeing more and more being deployed?
Yeah, so more are getting to production state, right? But you know, at the beginning of this year, you know, it was funny because this is kind of how the adoption went, right? Is that, you know, October-ish or whatever, 2022, no one's got a budget for generative AI. No one's thinking about it, right? All of a sudden, OpenAI launches, OpenAI, you know, ChatGPT comes out, everyone's like, holy shit, okay, we need to be doing something. So then we get into Q1 and everyone's like, you know, like freezes, and it's like, all right, let's watch how this kind of plays out. Budgets start to kind of get reallocated. Q2 of this year comes in. Companies are looking at it saying, all right, is this just the hype or is it really disrupting stuff? At this point too, their employees are starting to use it, regardless of internal policies, because they don't have any.
Or they ignore them.
Or they ignore them, yeah. And then, so we're in Q2. Budgets are kind of getting there. Then we hit Q3, right? And it's like, all right, we need to do something. Like something's got to happen. And where a lot of the phone calls that we were getting, and where a lot of our customers were starting it was like, hey, Corey, our CEO says that we need to do something with generative AI. We know that it's hot. We know it's going to help, but we're not really sure where to start.
Yep.
Or, hey, you know, we have an idea for a pilot. We want to build something small just to test it out and see. And then that was a lot of like Q3. And then now heading into Q4, a lot of them are like, all right, this works. Like we've kind of validated the product market fit with our employees.
Yep.
Now, how do we secure this? How do we launch this? Like, how do we do it in a way that doesn't hit public models? Can we run, this is like the number one question. It's like, can we run ChatGPT without ChatGPT? I'm like, all right. So your question is like, can you keep your data that you're asking it from going to
that seems to be a big issue with the enterprise, is that they want all of the benefits, but they don't want to use any of their own data or private data.
Right. So that's where a big adoption point's at now. And then, you know, looking at next year in Q1, it's going to be, all right, we've got some of these models, but like they like work okay, but we need to train them on our own data, which now comes into a whole nother investment side of like, how do you curate the data? How do you tag the data? How do you retrain or optimize or do transfer learning, which is where you take a base model and then train it on top, or I guess fine tuning is the word nowadays, for it. And that'll be Q1, right? And then Q2 of next year will be how do we like deploy this larger scale within our orgs. And then Q3 is like, how do we integrate this into like customer value back? And when I say customer value back, I'm talking about like large Fortune 100, 500 that don't typically provide AI type solutions back or integrated in. How do they start to leverage out? Because so some of our, like CPG brands and stuff, like there's very valid concern that like our brand is so, they're like, our brand is so important. We're like 100 years old, et cetera, whatever it is.
Yeah.
How do we put controls that, if we tell this thing to go generate some advertising stuff, that it doesn't, put up something that we do not, that we really don't want to have up there.
Right.
So like, what are those controls, et cetera, which are all like very valid concerns.
Yeah. Do you see, so it does feel like most of the companies we're doing this with small steps, small projects. Do you see the next steps then moving towards an external facing product or larger project, but still very focused on internal usage?
Yeah, so I think both. And the reason why is that one, you can get huge levels of cost savings internally, right? Mm-hmm. So you can kind of like lower your OpEx spend, which everyone wants to do.
Right.
And, from the customer side, you can also increase, earnings and revenue. Now, what I think is going to be, what I do want to watch and see is how, come Q2 of next year, are people still piggybacking on AI as like the core value prop? And that's like what I really, really actually hate about where we are today is that everyone, it's like, what's that meme where they're just like slapping the hood of a car and they're like, this baby will get 30 miles a gallon or something. It's like everything nowadays is just like, slap, put AI on it, and now it's going to be awesome. And then when no one uses it, VC, founders or companies are like, why did nobody care about this? Because no one's thinking, no one's designing from a customer experience and actually value position to start with. So when I look at Q2 and more of next year, it's going to be, are people still saying AI, or is it just kind of inherent, and that it's more about this is the value you get from this product, not, we get to say AI, therefore, our investors and shareholders and customers are immediately going to flock to whatever this is.
Yeah, I we've done a couple of episodes too on whether the backlash or the trough of disillusionment is going to happen with AI. The feeling was that we were headed towards it, but then all of a sudden there was a raft of new products that came out. So now we're like, oh, maybe we're not disillusioned with it. But at some point, if so many people are slapping AI on their products and then they don't get used, you will have some of the accountants at these companies going, where's the value? We just spent all this money and you haven't provided us with value yet.
Yeah, and
and then they'll just blame all the developers, right?
yeah, exactly. And I think that what's important though to remember about AI, because I draw a lot of comparisons from blockchain to generative AI, right? And so are we heading a trough of disillusionment? Like, I think so, but it's to what degree? AI has been around since like the 60s.
Yeah.
Like this stuff's been cranked on for a long time. When it first came out, with DeepMind and all of that, and it beat chess, everyone was like, ooh, this is going to be it.
Yeah.
And then it fell off, right?
Yeah.
And then a new type of AI comes back. So I don't think that the trough is as deep as it might be for like a truly new tech on its first kind of run out there, like blockchain was. Like the blockchain trough is like the Mariana Trench, but like I firmly believe that that's going to come back too. And AI is a big reason that blockchain will stay relevant, which is a whole rant that I can go on there. But when I look at it and people ask, are we in a trough of disillusionment? It's that I think that we will hit one, but it's not going to be as devastating or as deep,
right,
as it would have been if this was a brand new technology off of it, which it's not. It's not.
Yeah.
Right?
And one of the reasons I think I agree with you on that is because it's so effective in so many different industries and verticals and use cases. It's not just because I think with blockchain, it felt like it was only going to be used for a certain number of industries or use cases, and then they couldn't really explain some of those use cases very well. And then of course, then the whole crypto thing got involved, and NFTs and all that other stuff. And most people were like, okay, I'm going to back off on this idea. But with Gen AI, you can go and ask, any search engine for a question, and it gives you an answer, and you go, ooh, that's kind of cool. Or the Midjourney stuff that you and I were talking about with the art generation. That's really cool stuff. So that's where I think AI has a little bit of a more of an advantage.
Yeah. So I think so, right? It's like, and again, it's been around for,
right,
50 years. So I do think that it does. I did think that generative AI came out with more value to customers out of the gate than what blockchain did. But what I think is interesting is that there's going to be a very large swing in, I think, popular opinion around AI when it comes to the general like intellectual property heist that was done and is being done daily on people's content that's created. Right?
Yeah.
Like, OpenAI is $1 billion company, and they made it all on your data. Like, they couldn't have done it without your data, which they went and got for free.
Yeah.
And when I look at the next generation of the web, being able to prove ownership of content that you make is going to be significantly important, right? Now, I'm not talking about like NFTs and this other stuff, but it's more of as more content and more value continues to get created within the digital space, not having some foundational way to track ownership of that is going to hinder its growth, and it will happen at some point. And blockchain is kind of that foundational infrastructure tool to enable it. So I don't think, again, when I think of blockchain coming back, it's going to come back as like, as like cloud computing did, right? Or something there, where it is a infrastructure tool that is built upon to help provide better experiences, and people aren't just slapping blockchain on it. It's like, ooh, now everyone will want it. Like, that is not the path. And I think AI basically created the market gap for blockchain to fit by not, by basically stealing a bunch of content.
Yeah. I think there are some movements on the content side of preventing AI from learning stuff from like a Wall Street Journal or New York Times article, things like that. But I think they're doing that just so that they can then license it, so that they can make some money off of the content, and then they'll allow it if someone pays up for the licensing fee, rather than just
of course,
preventing it from happening completely. Do you remain generally optimistic about how generative AI can be used for software developers, or do you I get a sense that you are, but is there any roadblocks ahead that might come up, or are you past the idea of this might just be a fad? Like, where do you stand in terms of looking at the future?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm super bullish on it, right?
Yeah.
Again, and when I say about helping developers, like, I actually having generative AI write code is one piece of it. And for me personally, it's not what I'm most bullish about. Again, what I care about is all of those additional tasks that orbit around the act of doing software development. I think it's similar to, when you look at like surgeons or doctors, a very small fraction of their time is actually in there, doing surgery. The majority of the rest of it is paperwork, is doing all of this. And I think that's a very similar thing to software engineering. So where I do think it's going to help is in freeing up a ton of developers' time to do the complex art of writing code. Yeah. But then also generally make the software development process better, because, documentation is getting well written. You're getting good, summarization of classes. You're able to store context of, basically problems that might have arose. You're able to better track issues. You can then measure, performance and, burn rates a lot better. So then you can stay predictive about how these teams are going to perform. So it has a domino effect. It's not just great, it can write you some code if you give it a prompt. There's a lot more impact that comes down the road from it than just that.
Would you have any advice for a software developer that might not be aware of these benefits, or if are they skeptical? If there are some skeptics out there, just basically tell them to keep a more open mind about it, or how do you convince some of these skeptics?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where you need to, and I don't want to say adapt or die because it sounds very harsh and bold. But it's got, if you don't take advantage of it to make your life easier, someone else is going to do it.
Right.
So in order to stay competitive, especially as the market becomes more saturated, like you need to find a way to differentiate. And also, the one thing that developers are really, really bad at is celebrating their wins. And kind of celebrating the good work that they do.
Yeah.
And being able to show to business leaders, right? Their managers, their CTO, their CEO, people that hold the budgets and stuff, being able to describe the work that they're doing. And generative AI is one great tool to help you truly convey your value back into a company, right?
Yeah.
And doing that, doesn't apply just to people that are FTEs at a company already, but also freelancers, right? Being able to have a great portfolio, descriptive portfolio that people can see, because the world is so noisy now. It's really hard to stand out, especially if you're trying to get a job, find a job, move up in a job.
Yeah.
So if it's not using generative AI to write code because you don't want to do that, fine. But I suggest still looking at it again for all of those additional activities that are around you.
Right. Great stuff, Corey. Again, thanks for joining us on the show today. Some really great points that you make here.
Sure. Yeah, no, thanks for having me.
All right. That's all the time we have for today's episode. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, add any comments that you have below. Join us every week for new episodes of Today in Tech. Have a great day, and we'll see you next time.